This is John from Polymath Producer, and just recently I've been reading this book, The Prince Purple Rain Era. It's a book that chronicles his career from 1983 to 1984, the end of 1984, and that period there was some of his most famous music that he's most known for. So it was the Purple Rain era, where he had both the number one song, the number one album, and the number one movie all at the same time. So while reading the book, I noticed, I'm about halfway through, so I'm going to make this video part one, but halfway through, I noticed that there were certain things that kept popping up with every month that they go through, certain like mindsets or ways of life that Prince used, and I feel like that you could attribute those ways of life to a lot of his success. So I've got 7 at the moment that I've written down, 7 things that he did when it came to music production that got him success. And I feel like that Prince is like the archetypal sort of, is that a word? Archetype, polymath producer. He did everything himself. The only reason why he used engineers was because he sort of had to, because or else his workflow would die down. So he used engineers, but reluctantly, because he didn't like anyone else in the room. He just wanted to just let it all out of him. So I'll go through the 7 rules of success that I wrote down. I've called them rules just because like it seems that he sort of abided by these in a way where it was just part of who he was. So rule number 1 was definitely decisiveness. Okay, decisiveness. So I've written down like 4 quotes from the book. Be massively decisive about your creativity and never question the internal source. So the thing about him was that when he created, when he made a decision, he just went with it. He made a decision, that's it. Didn't think twice about it. He never questioned himself. He never questioned what his inner source was telling him, his intuition was telling him. He just did it. And that fed into his work ethic and being true to himself, which I'll talk to in the next rules. But never question yourself. Even if you fail, don't think about it too much. Just let it come through you. Make the decisions that you think are the best at the time, and then move forward. Get advice and feedback. This is just another thing that I wrote down. Get advice and feedback from people around you, but ultimately, it's your life to lead. You have the final say, and it's your decisions that ultimately count, and whether you want to take that advice on board or not. Okay. So let the channel, he calls it the channel, let the channel be clear, and always ask what needs to be here right now in this song. So when you're writing a song or creating a track, what needs to be here right now? That's what you should always be asking yourself, and then trust in yourself that you'll make the decisions that flow through you to make the right choice. Rule number 2 was, so rule number 1 was decisiveness. Rule number 2, find a way to make it happen. Okay, there's multiple times in this book where people would question him. They'll be like, "What? Like, this is impossible. We can't do that for you." And he'll be like, "Find a way to make it happen. Just make it happen." And I think that I read Steve Jobs' biography, and he had a very similar mindset when it came to things. And I think that this is something that a lot of successful people have. And it's, when there's a block to anything, doesn't matter how small, how big the problem is, you can find a way to make it happen. Nothing matters. Just make it happen. Okay. So there was multiple times up to the point where I'm at where he said that to either people or himself, whatever it was, he just make it happen. Which I think is a very powerful mindset to have, because it means that not only you are limited, but those around you, you're not allowing them to be limited as well. You're just getting it done. First and foremost, he was an executor. He just executed on what he wanted to happen. Made decisions, moved on. Rule number 3, perfectionism is in spontaneity. Okay, so Prince wasn't actually a perfectionist. A lot of people think that Prince was a perfectionist, and look, to an extent he was, but when it came to his way of creating things, overall he was more, he just wanted to just get his ideas out as quick as possible, get them done, and then move on. Okay, so there's multiple things in here that talk about his perfectionism. So apparently this is sort of the thing that he went by. So he goes, perfectionism is in spontaneity. You do it, and whatever it is, it's perfect. Okay, so you just make it, and whatever it is perfect, which sort of feeds into the first one where you sort of just want to let it flow through you. Create and don't ponder what you created. The important thing is to have the sound serve the ideas, not the other way around. So he never got caught on like, set too much sound design, like, oh, let's try and make this sound like as perfect as possible. He let the sound serve the ideas. So his ideas always took first place, which, is not for everyone, but that's his method of doing things. Don't be a perfectionist. You don't have time for it. You can't wait on perfectionism. Okay. Believe in spontaneity and getting the ideas down, not on the technical side. So he wasn't really a fan of the technical side. That's why he didn't like engineers, because they were too technical for him. He just wanted to get the ideas down. He didn't care about the technical side, which sort of is paradoxical to what I'm saying for you to do, is to look at techniques. But I always say, get the techniques, but then once you know them, try and break the rules. So, you got to always keep that in mind. Always go with your own intuition. Put it down before you move on. Okay, so just let your intuition flow through, put it down, and then move on. Get the songs done as quick as you can. So he always, every time he had a new idea, he would make the song, and he would always try to get it down as quick as possible. So he had the ideas, and he just he wanted to get it down as quick as possible, even if it meant doing 20 hours straight in the studio. Okay, there's multiple times in this book where he did, 20 hours straight, and he got the song done in those 20 hours. There's a song called The Beautiful Ones from the Purple Rain album, which is a phenomenal track, and he did that whole thing in the space of 20 hours. Wrote it, produced it, and mixed it in 20 hours. There's other cases where he was in the studio for 3 days straight without sleep. Yeah, he went full out with this. Don't let anything slow down the process of getting ideas to tape. Obviously it's tape, but for us it would be getting the ideas down onto the DAW. Never let anything slow you down. Yeah, that's key. Move fast. Okay, so he did, on average, 2 to 6 songs a day. It was normal for him to do that. Okay, he was like a printing press. Didn't worry about the technicals or trying to be perfect with the technicals. He wasn't into that stuff. He just wanted to get the emotion down first as quick as possible and just let the spontaneity come through him. He was song-centric. Okay, so he captured the essence in one go. He wanted to capture the essence of the song in one go and then go on to the next one. So he just wanted to get it down, move on to the next track. He wanted to get out of the music's way and let it do what it wants to do. Yeah, he sort of identified himself as separate from the music he was doing. He would just let it come through him. He was like the vehicle almost. That's the way he saw it. And when it came to mixing, he didn't do what was technically right. He always did what just felt right to him. So he'd sort of just fiddle with knobs, and if it sounded right to him, it was fine. And he even confessed that his mixes in that period were actually pretty bad. He confessed that in an interview later on. He said, if you listen to the mixes, they're pretty terrible because I just wanted to get them done and move on to the next song. And we're talking about some of his most enduring hits right here that he sort of just fitted around with and threw away, like he was just wanted to get them done and move on. So it just goes to show you that, when he was caught up in that era, his main goal was to just get it done. Halfway through the book, though, you can sort of see that he starts to transition from that mindset more to a perfectionist mindset, because in the first year, from in the 1983 period, he's just smashing songs out one by one, just getting them out as quick as possible. But when he starts to work on the Purple Rain album, that's when he actually starts to spend more days in the studio and working on the same songs for a more extended period of time. So there is paradoxes in what I'm saying with the perfectionism is in spontaneity. He was always spontaneous when he first put down the ideas, but after a while, in 1984, he started to actually work more on overdubs, mixing, all that stuff, especially because he was coming up to the movie, so he wanted to make sure the songs were perfect, in a sense. So he did spend multiple days on the songs after he created them when it came to the Purple Rain album, but when it came to the spontaneity, it was always straight up. And it was always different. Obviously, in Beautiful Ones, he did it in one go, in the 20 hours. But a lot of the other songs, like Computer Blue, he spent days on, just overdubbing, tweaking, trying to get it perfect. So those are the first 3 rules out of the 7. I'll make a part 2. And crazy stuff. Definitely is a wake-up call for your own work ethic. So, Prince's Rules to Success Part 2. In the first one, we looked at rule number 1, which was decisiveness. Rule number 2, which was find a way to make it happen. Rule number 3, perfectionism is in spontaneity. Now, I'm going to call these rules to success mainly because they obviously worked for Prince. They are the most recurring mindsets that I keep finding in this book that I'm reading, this book here, the Purple Rain era, which is when, he was like peaking in terms of his commercial appeal. So we're going to look at another 4 more rules to success that I found in this book so far. So I still haven't finished the book. I'm only halfway through, and I've already got all these. So rule number 4, we'll get straight into it. Be true to yourself. Be unique. Okay, this is obviously one attribute of Prince that is very obvious, is that he was always unique. He always wanted to be unique and stand out, and he was always ultimately true to himself and what he wanted, which sort of goes in line with the decisiveness, rule number 1, decisiveness, which is like whatever he wanted to do, he just did. He was decisive with it, and if it felt right to him, he would just do it. And I think he attributes that to always, he did a quote here, it was like, the ultimate responsibility is the hardest one, the responsibility to be true to yourself. So that was obviously on his mind a lot. He always wanted to be true to himself and what he wanted to do. And he always wanted to be unique. So here's just a few things that I've written down. Ride the edge of uniqueness by mixing your influences. So he had a lot of influences. And what he'd do was he would ride the edge of what he was doing with his influences. So he would have a whole bunch of influences, but rather than just copying them, he wants to ride the edge of that, which is what I sort of talk about with when you're gathering techniques. So you're gathering techniques from all these songs and stuff that you're reverse engineering. You don't want to copy them. You want to learn the fundamental reason as to how they work, the skill sets involved, and then make your own path and be unique. They're just tools. You're just finding tools to make your vision come alive. That's sort of the message that I try to use in Polymath Producer as well. He says, whatever the trends are, go in the opposite direction. Play by your own rules. So he always wanted to just play by his own rules. He never wanted to just follow what other people were doing. He wanted to go in his own direction. And he didn't care what anyone thought of him, which a lot of the time was very polarizing. But when it came to his fan base, they were very dedicated. So he was able to polarize a whole bunch of people and then have his fan base who were like highly into him. And one of the things he did to do that was obviously to go in the opposite direction when other people were following trends. So he always just did his own thing, played by his own rules. When it comes to the dramas in your life, so if you're facing dramas, life dramas, let that influence your writing. So write about what is happening in your life that is in flow with what is true to you. What else have I got here? Great. Okay, so create sounds and music that no one will be able to figure out. So he loved to make music knowing when he'd finished it that no one would be able to figure out what he'd done in that song. He loved that feeling, which sort of, you can take that mindset away from you. I've heard many producers say this before, like I've heard Warren Campbell say this before as well. And they say, you want to create sounds in your songs that no one else will be able to mimic, because then that makes the song unique. And no one will be able to figure out how to get that sound. They might be able to make a cheap copy or whatever, but they would never be able to get that sound. Another thing that he did, a way of life that he chose to live, was he lived as pretty much a living paradox. He was a mystery. He never gave away the meanings behind his tracks. He was very paradoxical person. One day he might be like super nice. The next day he'll be like really cold and won't even answer you. So he was, as a person, he was very paradoxical. You could never figure him out, and he tried to put that into his music as well, the way that he made music. And obviously that's just him though. You don't have to do that, but when it comes to being a paradox in life, a lot of the time that can actually be very attractive to fans and stuff like that. So if you're building a fan base, if you're a little bit paradoxical, you're not just one thing, then you're a little bit hard to figure out. It tends to draw people in that way. So you know, he was able to place that in his music as well. When it came to his music, he was very paradoxical. He would write a song that was fully based about sex, which was like highly controversial, but then he would add a spiritual element to it, where it sort of like balanced it out. Rule number 5 is work ethic of a champion. Okay, now this one was so crucial in this book that I just saw all the way through. Okay, so he was ruthless when it came to his work ethic. What he wanted to do was put himself under musical pressure, quotation. By putting himself under musical pressure, he was hoping that the genius would come out. So he wanted to constantly put himself under this, there's a quote in the book by someone else, but they call it musical pressure. And that allowed his genius to come through. He would have the ability to work 3 days straight without sleeping. I mentioned in the perfectionism rule, he would literally go 3 days without sleep. He thought that tiredness was weakness and for pussies. And, to put it lightly, his sort of thing was, you make more honest decisions when you're tired anyway. So who cares if you're tired? He never wanted to leave a good idea unfinished. It actually hurt him, pained him if he hadn't a good idea and he left it unfinished. So he needed to get it done. That explains why he has like thousands of songs in his vault that have never been released. He's finished them, but they've never been released. Be the number one in terms of hours put. Okay, so he always was the number one person in the room putting the most hours into his craft. Everyone else wanted to go to sleep, and he'd say, "You can go to sleep if you want, but I'm staying here." And then they'd be obliged to stay, even if they've been up for like days straight. So he just wouldn't let up. He was absolutely ruthless. They say in the book, most bands spend, a month creating one song, then a month on overdubs. Prince wouldn't leave the studio till it was done that one day. Okay, that was his rule. He just got it done. He just needed to get it out. He never missed a day in the studio. Even if he lost sleep, he just stayed up all night. He just wanted to be in there all the time. He lived, breathed, and slept music. He became obsessed. Okay, he was all out with this. This is all he did. Anything else he saw as a distraction. So he barely watched TV. He'd barely do anything else. He'd barely do anything that like a normal person would do. He would all it was just music. He'd be listening to music, making music, performing music. That's all he did. And that's not for everyone. That's a big sacrifice that you need to make if you want to go that route. Number 6 was make visual records. So he says, when you write an arrangement, picture a blind person listening to the song. Choose chords and sounds and percussion instruments which would help clarify the feel of the song to the blind person. But with everything, he goes, with everything I do, I try to keep that blind person in mind. Okay, so you've got to make visual records. The record has got to put you in a place where you visualize something. That was rule number 6. So make visual records, which is pretty self-explanatory. He wants to create pictures with his music, and everything in the music contributes to that picture, that visual picture, which I think is very important. So I wrote that down as a rule that he sort of follows. And rule number 7 was pull influences from everywhere. Okay, so he reverse engineered, which I always talk about in Polymath Producer, about reverse engineering songs. He reverse engineered songs to understand them. So he'd listen to them for hours at a time, fall asleep listening to them. He'd wake up and they'd still be, like people said, you'd wake up and they'd still be playing if you fell asleep in the same room as him. So he wanted to understand what others were doing so that he could use those techniques himself, but obviously he broke the rules. So he followed, he does a lot of the rules that I sort of preach in Polymath Producer. He did them naturally himself. Okay, so that's why he's sort of like the archetype Polymath Producer. If you've had to choose one person that fit like a full-on Polymath Producer, Prince would probably be it. And rule number 7, yeah, pull influences from everywhere. Okay, and pull influences from everywhere, no matter how minor the sound. So it didn't matter what it was. It didn't even have to be music. He would pull influences from everywhere, whether that be a person he was talking to in real life, like a situation they were going through, a sound they created, whatever it was. Pull influences, and then ultimately allow that to come through you in your own way. So those were the 7 rules that I've written down so far. I'm halfway through the book, so if I get any more, I will make another video. But yeah, those are the first 7 rules that I found that Prince used all the way through the book, all the way through these 2 years in his Purple Rain era, his most commercially successful era. So I hope you've enjoyed these 2 videos. I'll see you next time.